is yours.
All right, thank you so much for the invitation to appear before the committee today. My name is Courtney Radsch, and having spent the past 20 years as a journalist, scholar, and practitioner writing, speaking, and working on tech policy and news media sustainability around the world, I am grateful to have the opportunity to bring my expertise to this informational hearing on issues facing digital news media, especially as a sixth-generation Californian who got my start in journalism at Berkeley's Daily Cal paper. As the director of the Center for Journalism and Liberty at Open Markets Institute and a fellow here at the Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy, I researched the way that technology policy impacts information ecosystems and co-authored the report that you have on your desks. Over my 2 decades of experience in the media sector and academia, I have never received any funding from a tech platform for my research, and Open Markets Institute does not accept any funding from technology companies, making us a rare independent voice on technology policy and journalism. To begin, the crisis facing journalism is not a problem of the news industry's own making or of the internet, and it affects all news outlets, not only digital ones. It is a result of legal regulatory frameworks that privilege tech platforms over the press and give the former unfettered power to set the rules. As you design policies to support news, please keep in mind big tech platforms, specifically Google and Meta, but likely soon several AI companies, play an integral and inescapable role throughout the entire news value chain. They set publishing protocols, which publishers must adapt to and which can be changed on a whim with significant costs to publishers as well as repercussions for news visibility and monetization. They own and control the tools and services journalists use to do their jobs, including email, web hosting, cloud services, messaging, archiving. The cloud services especially important to investigative journalism and with AI rising in importance in journalism, as well as cybersecurity services. They determine the rules for reaching audiences and content moderation, while also controlling the most popular online spaces those audiences use, meaning that they shape the business models, the editorial strategies, production, and dissemination throughout the sector. Big tech monopolizes the entire digital advertising ecosystem, from ad servers to ad exchanges to auctions, as well as the app stores where news outlets sell their subscriptions. Publishers face a coerced choice set when it comes to platforms, one that is compounded by a lack of interoperability and data portability between platforms. Asking journalism to opt out of them is not realistic or feasible, nor are proposals to wall off news content and prevent it from being scraped or used in large language models and AI products. Removing quality information from LLMs and information retrieval services will only exacerbate mis and disinformation, reinforce generative AI harms like hallucinations, and undermine a host of downstream applications. The news crisis is not because of the internet. Craigslist did not destroy and co-opt the business model. Platform monopolies did. Despite the fact that a handful of U.S. tech monopolies are infrastructural to news media around the world, our laws and regulations have not caught up with this reality. And these tech platforms enjoy unprecedented exemptions from U.S. libel law and anti-discrimination requirements and privacy constraints, which has an impact on media around the world. Nor do they pay their fair share of taxes in the countries where they are headquartered, much less where they operate. And perhaps most consequentially for news media globally, platforms claim unparalleled rights to use copyright-protected material like journalism without permission or compensation. However, policymakers are waking up to this fact around the world, and the fact that these tech monopolies form the backbone of the modern media system. Especially with the generative AI revolution, this could further exacerbate the crisis facing journalism and democracy, and they are exploring ways to make big tech pay for the news they use. Australia's pioneering 2021 News Media and Digital Platforms Mandatory Bargaining Code required designated platforms to negotiate with publishers by establishing an arbitration process. Although no platform has been designated yet, the mere existence of this legislation has resulted in Google and Meta paying more than $200 million to Australian news media, including small, local, and specialized media, and leading to the creation of hundreds of new journalism jobs, with job ads rising 46%. A dozen countries and all EU member states are actively exploring or enacting policies to address fair compensation, according to CJL's Technology and Media Fair Compensation Frameworks Global Tracker. These have primarily focused on trying to rebalance the playing field between big tech platforms and news organizations by exempting publishers from antitrust restrictions on collective bargaining, requiring relevant platforms to come to the negotiating table, and thus creating a forum for negotiations or granting explicit ancillary copyrights to publishers. For example, Canada's recently passed Online News Act allows publishers to collectively bargain with large digital platforms. Meta, of course, has censored Canadian news rather than comply. Others are going to talk about Canada in depth. Brazil's copyright law reform seeks to tackle power imbalances between various digital platforms and artists and creators, including news publishers. The EU Copyright Directive created a right for news publishers to receive remuneration from tech companies for scraping and reusing their content, while leaving the specifics open to national interpretation. So what we've seen in Denmark, for example, as they seek to transpose the directive, is that virtually every news publisher has joined a new collective. So they've managed to kind of get over their differences to collectively negotiate what this is going to look like for their country, and consider that AI companies and large language models, as well as big tech platforms, should be required to pay. In India, reforms are expected to include a news media bargaining framework, rescind overly broad intermediary liability exemptions for platform intermediaries, which, by the way, we export Section 230 through our trade laws, which is very problematic, and address copyright-protected uses of news content to train LLMs. New Zealand's Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill creates a safe harbor and compels platforms to negotiate. South Africa and Taiwan are both in initial exploratory phases of similar frameworks. Meanwhile, however, Google and Meta have tried to buy off news media around the world and head off regulation through direct assistance, grants, fellowships, inclusion in special news products, as you heard Richard Gringas testify, and by scaring smaller publishers with the idea that they'll lose out on any crumbs of funding that they may have received from the platforms, for example, Google News Initiative, or be cut off of their products entirely. These paltry sums not only undervalue news, but also make journalism beholden to the benevolence of the tech platforms that they cover. Collective bargaining and a regulatory framework that creates a forum for negotiations to take place increases the power of local and smaller news outlets. Currently, there is no forum where tech platforms are compelled to negotiate with all outlets, not just the largest ones, other than in Australia. Creating a forum for negotiations is a critical yet often overlooked aspect of this type of legislation, especially since publishers could also leverage to negotiate for use of their data and content in AI systems. Furthermore, the fact that large news organizations benefit is not a bad thing. They employ thousands of people, they have foreign correspondents, they generate the most traffic. But indeed, one of the biggest challenges these policies face comes from small publishers who feel like they are losing out. And they are right if we acquiesce to how big tech has narrowed the discussion to focus on referral traffic amid vast informational asymmetries. Unfortunately, many publishers have bought into this narrow conception of value that equates value with traffic metrics and excludes generative AI companies that use news content to build and improve their models and services. This myopic focus disregards the way that journalism improves the platform for all users, even if they don't click through on a headline. Recall Brandon's earlier testimony showing screenshots from Google search. You heard about this study from Switzerland. It rightly hypothesized that people might engage in different types of behavior if their search results didn't include information from news publishers. Researchers in Switzerland found that the value of news is far, far higher than policymakers or publishers think it is on Google search, which accounts for the majority of Google's $280 billion annual revenue. Click-through rates, by the way, I was researching that question, is around 30% maximum and often down to 1% on Facebook. U.S. economists accounting for additional value created through complementary transactions between tech platforms and publishers, meaning they're both benefiting, found that Google, if you split that, owes U.S. publishers more than $10 billion a year. Meta should owe 7% of its ad revenue, or just under $2 billion a year. Furthermore, a narrow concept of value ignores the public interest served by journalism and the tax that big tech imposes on the public when local businesses can't survive, when civic life is reduced to engagement metrics and corruption proliferates because there is no watchdog holding those in power to account. Establishing value and building trust between publishers and with the public requires transparency. Effective policy interventions must include transparency and data access requirements that enable publishers to ascertain value and thus develop more informed bargaining positions, as well as some level of transparency for the deals themselves. The global principles on fair compensation lay out 10 principles, including transparency, accountability, and collectivity, that should guide these policy interventions. They were adopted in South Africa in July by media practitioners and experts from around the world.
Thank you, Ms. Radsch.
Thank you.
If you would wrap it up. Thank you.
All right, so just to conclude, journalism is a particularly valuable source of training data for large language models, making up half of the top 10 sites. I'm happy to go into that in more detail, but want to leave you with the idea that this is not fair use. It wasn't fair when the tech titans used it in the social media era. It's not fair now. Thank you.
Okay.